opinions of any callers, guests, or the host of the SMF Voice are not to be taken as factual information. The SMF Voice urges all participants of the show to research and fact-find on their own in order to draw their own conclusions about any topic talked about pertaining to any and all content presented in the broadcast chat or any other form of participation on the SMF Voice. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Stow Munroe Falls Voice. Before we get into it today, a little contact information. To find us on Facebook, look for SMF Voice. To find us on Spotify, SMF Voice, YouTube, SMF Voice. And if you have any questions, concerns, want to be a guest on the show, have an idea for a guest for the show, you can email us at smfvoice@twc.com. On today's show, we have a man who is no stranger to the Stow Munroe Falls City School District. In fact, he's no stranger to the Board of Education because he used to be a member and, in fact, used to be the president a few years ago of the Stow Munroe Falls Board of Education. This is a man who a lot of people have problems with and a lot of people like, because you can't peg him as conservative. You can't peg him as liberal. You can't say that he's moderate. He says he's moderate. He kind of, on the Board of Education when he was on it before, kind of ran that board as a moderate. The question is that what we need on Stow Munroe Falls Board of Education next year when we vote again for the 2 seats coming up, or don't we? So coming up in the interview, you make your own mind up about Jason Whitacre. Straight ahead. Joining me today in studio is a man who is, I would say, relatively aware of what's going on in our school district, and he's familiar with it, and not from the outside looking in. This is a guy who's been on school board before. He was a school board president at one time, and he's looking to throw his hat into the ring again. I think this might be a for sure thing, but we'll talk with him. I'd like to introduce Mr. Jason Whitacre. Jason, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Splendid day today. Beautiful fall day as we conduct this interview, and it little pep in my step today. So I was happy to see you show up so that we can discuss what your plans are, who you are, and go forward from there. You know what? If you would, let's start off like I start off with everybody else. Explain who Jason Whitacre is. What do you do? What's your outlook here for Stow? Who are you?
Some would just say boring. I'm a little boring. I'm an attorney, licensed to practice law in 3 states, licensed title agent, as you know, former school board member, president 1 year, vice president the year after that. Got kids in the school district. And that is what kind of led me to run in the first place. And it's kind of what's leading me to run again now. The fact that I've got kids in the district, my law background has me very process driven, and we can talk about all of that. But, at this point, I got off of the board. I'm a little upset with the way things are going in the school district, and probably maybe for different reasons than a lot of people are upset with the school district. But at this point, it just seems necessary that we get some different heads in the room.
So you're a husband, a father, a resident here in Stow. So you're not just an attorney, that's joining the radio show here.
That is true.
Like Brian Ames did. You actually live in the district, so you totally have skin in the game when it comes here.
I have kids in the district. I live in the district. In fact, spent the last couple of years, we're still working on it, but we've been renovating an old one of Stow's older homes.
Oh, cool.
Right there on Graham Road. And so, rather than throw something away that maybe is a little older, we're finding ways to make it new again. So I think there's perhaps an analogy to be made there that we might get into later, but there's perhaps an analogy to be made there as far as, not casting aside some good fixed assets that have value left in them.
Well, there's a bit of a metaphor there that can be used for this. So really, when you look at it, you're taking on all this. You're obviously busy full time as an attorney, full time as a husband and father, and yet here you go looking at school board again. So my guess is, something's poking you a little bit, and we will get into that. Let's talk about your past school board experiences. Why'd you run the first time? What'd you see?
Similar to what I'm running, one of the reasons I'm running now is the fact that the district had some issues. There'd been some internal infighting. There were lawsuits that had been filed surrounding the district over the several years before I got on the board. And I felt like one of the things that the school district lacked was, kind of a career professional who did not look at things from a partisan standpoint. Again, as boring as it is, I'm a process guy. I want to see the rules followed. And, my mantra that I try to do with my kids too is to say, look, you want to make sure that you're not always going to be the one making the decisions. You're not going to be in power. And so, political parties kind of are guilty of this. They get in power and then they do everything that they don't like about the other guy when they're in power. And so I thought that perhaps my kind of even keel demeanor might help manage all of the personalities. The school board is most people shouldn't want to be on the school board, to be honest with you. It's not a job where you get a lot of nice cards in the mail. Right,
you're not on anybody's Christmas list.
No, I wasn't getting, friendly text messages and emails. Hey, great job over that meeting. You really nailed those rules last night. That's not the type of response that I got when I was on the board. Why'd you do this? Why did you do that? And at the end of the day, some of the feedback I got when I was on the board was kind of crazy. I would get emails, that not only inferred, but actually explicitly said, hey, I know that you and the board members get a bonus at the end of the year for every dollar you don't spend, but, don't cut our kids' programs. I would get those kinds of emails, and it's like,
interesting.
The school board, as far as public service officials go, basically makes nothing. Mm-hmm. You get $60 or $70 or whatever it is per meeting before taxes. And that's only official meetings of the board. So if I've got a committee meeting, if I've got a, show up this football game, show up at a band concert, I shouldn't, but I don't get paid for that as a school board member.
Well, there's prep and research too, as you're at home and looking over different programs and different ideas that are being, that are going to be coming before the board. So, yeah.
I probably made a blustery 30 or 7 cents an hour, I think, the last time I was on the board, if I quantified my time. So you don't do it for the pay.
No.
And you don't do it for the authority, but you do have this strange municipal entity where, you look at city council, you look at the mayor, the school board is in control of tens of millions of dollars in public assets, hundreds, if not thousands of employees. Most people would agree, if you've got a family, your most valuable asset is your child, your children. Mm-hmm. And so now you have these school board members who are in charge of this thing where these kids spend almost all of their time. And there's a lot of responsibility there for basically no consideration, financial or otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're asking the public nonstop for funding here and there, and really, at the end of the day, it's just the next time that you're going to run for board, are you going to win that seat because of what you did? So, that's the only answer to it. But in the meantime, you can spend a district into complete debt without really anything coming off your shoulders. You're not going to hurt. You're going to go home. You're going to have your warm bed, your warm meal, your house, and your job. So, yeah, no, I get that. So you were on school board, and basically, I would guess that you were sort of expecting it not to be this grandiose thing, right, that you would step into the position, that you would just try to keep process going and whatever. And, you and I, in fact, a lot of, I have you on the show because we built a relationship over the last couple of years. And part of that was because I totally misunderstood what you were doing on the board, who you are and why you were doing it. And I think a big thing was the fact that you took your position on the board seriously as to what a school board is supposed to do, and that's be a nonpartisan entity. And I was one of those people back in the day, full of piss and vinegar, who, if Jason Whitacre wasn't gonna, be this hardline rightist guy, I was gonna, let him know. And I let you know a few times. But it didn't sway you. And once we started talking afterwards, I started understanding why. And you have this really deep-seated feeling that your position or anybody's position on the school board is supposed to be nonpartisan, supposed to be for the kids and the process. It didn't seem like it ended up that way once your last term ended. When you were coming out of that, what was your main I don't want to say problem, but you just seem really upset about the way things went on the board.
Well, it was a difficult 4 years. I think maybe a month or so into my time, the shooting in Parkland happened. And so you have this tragic event in Parkland, a very motivated base of students, a similarly motivated but disagreeable set of parents in the district over the students' decisions at the time. And things kind of just continued from there. We had an issue. We had a finding for recovery from the state auditor that we had to deal with. We had treasurers in and out and lawsuits from treasurers or former treasurers. And then we had COVID. And so I had the fun of being the board president when COVID happened. And all of a sudden presiding over virtual meetings and can't have public comment, but we don't want to exclude the public. And so I would get, I would say, all right, well, fine, we'll read the letters online. But then you'd end up with these massive letter writing campaigns on any particular issue where you're trying to preside over a meeting and you could spend 3 hours reading all the public comments. And then after COVID, we're trying to get everyone kind of back in the schools. And it's just it was a long 4 years. Mm-hmm. And so there was quite a bit of environmental turmoil. I think as we kind of got through the process, I felt like one of my initial goals was to make the board more process oriented, more transparent with the public. One of the things that I really pushed for that I got a lot of pushback about was videotaping and live streaming the meetings. Board members don't necessarily, when they go into this, and certainly administrators, they don't like or love public speaking. And I'm not saying that I do, but it doesn't bother me. I'm used to having the things that I say be put on the record and having to deal with those 6, 12, 18 months down the road. So it didn't bother me. And I felt like the more the community could hear from the school board members, the more trust they might have in the process. But then one of the other things that really bothered me about it, and I feel like unfortunately it's not gotten any better, is the amount of conversation in the district that happens outside of an open meeting. That always bothered me. I tried to push as many issues into the public meeting as I could, much to the frustration of everyone else around me. But I wanted the public to be able to hear from me. And I thought that there was a lot of times that the public would benefit from hearing the 5 board members respectfully debate an issue, discuss an issue where we would have disagreements. But for the most part, the boards that I was on were able to get through a discussion without, people having to table each other, gavel each other. We occasionally had to do that with a public comment that would get a little rambunctious with us. But, that the board itself kind of over time had grown more accustomed to speaking in front of the public. And so, and personally and professionally, I've got a growing family, or the family's not growing anymore, but everyone's growing up. And between, the the kids getting older, my wife starting a different career. Personally, it was time for me to say, you know what, I cannot at that time devote the amount of time that I might need to make this effective. Let me just step aside and let someone else who has that time frame. But unfortunately, that's not really, that we've had, for one reason or another, 3 resignations in the board. I committed to my 4 years and I stayed on all 4.
To your credit, absolutely.
And, I guess back for more, because I just can't stand where the district's going. But, from just a global standpoint, but it was a challenging 4 years. I had thought when I had run that I was going to be an agent of change, and not in the way
I think everybody does.
Yeah, and I ended up changing things, but not in the way I had envisioned. And so so I had come in and said, I'm going to come in like gangbusters, and we're going to be more transparent. We're going to be more student focused. We're going to get rid of some of this other stuff. And I did some of that. There are other things that I did that I started to lay the groundwork, and I couldn't get a consensus on when I was on the board. Boards change after that. And some of those policy and procedures that we started when I was on the board didn't get them across the finish line, but then they later, bore some fruit. But it was, it was an eye-opening experience, not one that I didn't completely expect, but, I thought I had left the board kind of in good hands. There was another attorney still on the board at the time. And I said, okay, it's time for me to, I did my 4 years. I'm not looking to make a career out of this. Let another set of voices get in, and then I step back.
Well, I mean, now that, just to be clear too, on something that you said about conversations outside of open meeting, you're talking about board members getting together and having conversations outside of open meetings, correct?
Board members, administrators with board members, all of it. It's not that I don't think anyone goes into that ever saying, I'm going to cut a backroom deal, or they're going to do this, or they're going to do that. I just felt like the public and the board and the district, all of everyone together would gain something from having the respectful public discourse. Right. And so, one of the things that was when I got on the board, they tried to drill into me that you can have these disagreements, but when it came time to vote, it's going to be a 5-0 vote. And so that way the administration and the teachers and the community, everyone knows we're a unified front. And philosophically, I don't agree with that. I don't think that there's any harm in respectful dissent. I don't think there's any harm in a 4-1 vote. I mean, I probably lost more 4-1 votes in 4 years than anyone else combined.
And you're an attorney.
And I didn't mind. I knew which way the winds were blowing.
Yeah.
But I felt it was important for the community to know that there was another voice, there was another course of action that we could have taken.
Right.
So that maybe the next time, someone else who had a good idea that maybe just the board wasn't ready for yet would feel comfortable bringing that up and voting no. I voted no. One of the things I constantly lost on was I voted against allowing the elections department, election officials to conduct elections in the schools. And eventually we just ended up deciding as a group that we weren't going to have school on that day. We spend tens of thousands, if not, millions of dollars as a public school district over time, trying to keep people and things out of our school buildings. And then one day a year, sometimes 2, we have to open them up. Right. And you can't put security outside. You mean you have them kind of but I can't put metal detectors outside. I can't keep people from going into the restrooms.
Right.
And so I just was uncomfortable with, what if a voter who I can't control who they are, what they bring in, what they do. If a voter comes and leaves some contraband in the bathrooms, I have to rely on the custodial staff to find it before a kid does. And anyone who's had kids growing up knows that they find everything before you do.
Right. Exactly. Absolutely. They're always looking in those little nooks and crannies for those. Well, it comes from cereal boxes. Right. What's in the cereal box? What can I find? So, okay. So you saw these issues, things got a little bit much, but you stated that you thought you were leaving the board in good hands. You were basically done with it at the time. And we've had a couple of years pass here. Through our conversations, I was like, Jason, the way that you sounded, it wasn't anything bad. I mean, you weren't saying, I'll never do that again. Screw the, right. You've never been that guy. But you did leave an impression with me that through the last couple of years that I didn't expect you to ever come and throw your hat in the ring again. I thought you were done. It was all about getting your kids through school, staying focused on your career, on your family. And then about a week ago, I get a message from you and you're like, I think I might need a rubber room, and you threw it out there. So let's talk about some of those things that kind of speared you here to actually consider doing this.
Well, so it's been an open point of discussion in the school district for the past several years that our buildings are getting older and there's no real plan in place to upgrade, replace, whatever term you might want to use, modernize. There's been no ongoing kind of master plan for the facilities. And so the board I was on started the process. We got a study about the condition of all of the school buildings, a general assessment of cost from the state. Okay, this building, and what they do is they say, all right, this is the replacement cost of the building. This is the repair cost of the building. And when those numbers get too close to each other, the state would recommend that you just replace the building because, nobody wants to spend 90% of the replacement cost to bring it up to repair.
Right.
And so we did that, and we then started we formed the community committee to look at the facilities. This was right before COVID too. So we started this process and then COVID derailed it. But we started the process of looking at, okay, what are we going to do? So my term ends.
Hold on, before you continue, just so people understand that the buildings weren't being ignored up until they introduced this last levy. There have been past boards that have assessed it, that have looked at it seriously, trying to come up with an idea of what we can do to move forward with school buildings that are going to meet our kids' needs, just to make sure that that's a point.
No, and I've seen that kind of on social media recently with the failure of the bond issue, where there's this, and there was a long period of time where there were no studies, there were no concrete plans. I think a lot of board members would get dejected because they would mention the fact that Highland, which is the oldest of the buildings, might need to be replaced, and then you have all the nostalgia of everyone who went to Highland saying,
right,
"Don't tear down my school."
Right.
And then I remember being on the campaign trail, they would kind of look at me. First of all, why is a school board member walking the streets, or someone who wants to be on the school board? We don't see that. Why are you coming to my door? And then I would mention it, and then I'd say, well, I have to be honest with you, that building isn't really yours anymore. I mean, you have your memories, but you're not the one that has to go in there every day.
Right.
Your kids and your grandkids have to go in there every day. And I would say, look, you should go in there and look at it. Because there are things in there that are not kosher. Yeah. And I know that there's been some lampooning the district's attempts recently to point out some of the bad things. But I think that if you get past maybe the perspective of it and just focus on what they're showing you and not you, but you, the community, there are some serious issues. There's rooms in Highland, to my understanding, that are unusable because of the conditions in the room. And it was kind of an open point of conversation that there was a river running through Highland in the basement because of water control. And my understanding is that the district staff at one point had installed fans to help actually flow the water in and out.
The right
and
direction.
So they did create a river a little bit in the basement of Highland. And I thought it was important for the community to see that. And I wanted to start conducting board meetings in basements and crawls, wherever we could, not to scare people into voting for a bond issue or a levy, but to say, hey, look, you need to understand that these are the conditions that our staff and students are dealing with. But anyway, so we start this process. The the community group works very hard. The committee works very hard trying to come up with various options. And then they come up with this option, and I, again, I'm not privy to how the board did it, why they did it, what their decision making was, but they decided to put on this bond issue that I think a lot of people who support the schools felt was going to be basically dead on arrival. And they're free to disagree with that. It is what it is. But at the end of the day, it failed by almost 20%.
Right.
And, I don't like to lose. I don't like doing things that result in a loss. And I probably would not put up an issue that I thought was a sure
loser.
Yeah.
Right.
Because in the
what's
end,
the point? Right.
Well, in the end, it ends up being extremely divisive. You have all of these various groups in the community who may normally vote for levies saying, I can't. If they can't afford it because of inflation and property tax reassessments, those people who might otherwise want to vote for a levy can't.
Right.
But then the people who really want the levy to pass, they're trying. And so now for them, you're anti-student, you're anti-school. And I don't think that was the case for a lot of the no voters.
It wasn't. Yeah.
But I don't think that, I guess my frustration from it is that I don't think you can continue the status quo because you're going to end up with another significant loss. I've kind of gotten to the point where I feel like, as I've continued to think about it, that what really needs to happen is that the school district probably has to just bite the bullet and pay to hire experienced construction consultants, building management consultants, and I have a Facebook page. One of the things that I've been engaged with in the last day or so with various community members is what to do now. And I think we're to the point now where, most board members historically look at all of our backgrounds, start before me, however far back you want to go. We don't have backgrounds in building, maintenance, and construction.
Right.
That's just not who generally goes to be on the board. And then you have superintendents and operations managers, and they've got a lot of duties. The facilities manager has a lot of duties that don't involve long-term planning. And so when you don't have all of the stakeholders actively working on a comprehensive long-term plan, you kind of end up with the blind leading the blind.
Right.
One of the things I try to do in life is to learn what I don't know and understand that I can't know everything. And then find someone who does. And so I really think we've gotten to the point now where the community has been asked to build all new schools at the same time. And they've pretty soundly said, no, we can't. And, I don't think you can infer that the community doesn't want to support schools. The community doesn't want to, but we can't do this.
Well, that's the key word is can't. It's not that we don't want to. It's not that we don't want the best for, as far as them walking into these tremendously, new and beautiful structures that are geared towards the most technically advanced science that they can get to, computers that they can research on. It's not that we don't want that. Right. Every community wants that. We can't. And I think that's the key word is can't.
Well, and if you look at, I went to school at Mount Union College, now the University of Mount Union. They changed their name, but in Alliance, that's not considered an affluent community in Stow. I'm from the Youngstown area, a city named Girard. Most people know Girard by our Jib Jab hot dog shop right off the freeway there, but Girard's not ever going to be accused of being an affluent community. And so what people sometimes it's hard to get is that you go to the state, you go to the OFCC, the Facilities Commission, and they rank all the school districts in terms of median income. I just looked today. I think Stow is in the 400s out of 600. So we're in the top third. The higher you are, the lower the percentage that they pay.
Right.
So if I'm in a school district that is on the lower median income, the state may pay for most of my schools. And so you do have this situation where we have communities in Stow with the community itself is struggling economically, but all their buildings are brand new.
Right.
And for better or worse, we're not Hudson. Our median income is not Hudson's, and they can seem to afford to do this. Now they have pretty consistently built schools. So they're not asking their community members to do it all at once.
Right.
But our community is in that unfortunate position where the state is going to help us a little bit, but not a lot. And, you know, one of the other things is that when you take the OFCC money, you have to follow their rules.
Yeah.
And so they, you know, they're a state agency. They have their checklist. They have their check boxes. I remember when we got our study, for instance, they said, well, if you're going to take any of our money to fix the high school, and everyone agreed at the time, and I think still does, that the high school is new enough, it doesn't need replaced, it needs fixed. If we're going to upgrade and modernize the high school, back when I was on the board, the state said, well, okay, but your HVAC system, for instance, is not the one that we would install today. Mm-hmm. And we don't care that there's nothing wrong with it. You're replacing it. Or we don't care that industry standard allows you to put a certain width of depth of underlayment under a roof. We require twice that. And so what ends up happening is that you take their extra money. Let's say it's 25%. I think it was in that range when I was on the board.
I thought it was like 24%.
Yeah. So if it's in the 20s, but OFCC adds 18% to your construction costs, you're not getting that
bang for your buck.
Right. You know, they're watering it down. Mm-hmm. So
presenting it pretty. It's a nice package. It looks pretty. It's got a bow on it.
But it's not necessarily, you know, so when I see, and they're correct. I don't want to be flippant here. They're the people that say that you can't just do one building at a time because, you know, when you take money from OFCC, you kind of go down the list and you got to wait. That is true. And so you have to be smart about it. And I guess I'm at the point now we have all of these buildings. They all need something. Right. Even the newest building needs a lot. And so I think we really need to pay, even if it costs the district six figures, they're going to have to pay construction consultants to come in and say, here are longevity studies for all of the buildings. These are the buildings that we can kind of order. And they're going to have to come up with an orderly plan to fix this. We can ask the board to do it. The board can give its best effort. The community can give its best effort. But until you start getting experts in the room, you end up in this situation where we have to replace everything.
I had actually reached out to one of the board members and I had mentioned, you know, if this bond issue were to have failed, which it did, I had mentioned to her, I said, would the rest of the board be interested in meeting with some of the community, you know, outside of a committee type thing, but, and I'm not obviously not violating Open Meetings Act, but sit down with some people in the community, because here's what they don't seem to understand is that they are 5 people on the board right now with a couple consultants here and there and an attorney. And they are talking to an entire city, two actually, Stow Munroe Falls, where there are people that are involved in construction, involved in this, involved in plumbing, involved in whatever. And these are all resources for them to try to reach out. And so I had asked her, I said, would you be interested in sitting down with a couple people here and organizing people to come and say, you know what? This, and this is that, you know, I don't think they've even considered that. And I think that that's the whole idea of having a conversation with the community, is because there are people inside the community that might be able to give you an answer on where to go. And I don't mean in a bad way. Okay. Sure. I've given them an answer myself, but I mean, you know, you have this huge resource full of thousands of people, probably hundreds are in these fields where they might be able, hell, some of them might even be at the top of, you know, consultants for constructions for, you know, especially when it comes to commercial type construction. So that's going to be something. I'm going to have a show in a couple weeks, 3 weeks. I talked to a lot of people so far, and eventually I'm going to bring a lot of people, a lot of voices on board just to say, we're here, you know, we're here to help. What you need to do is put out a call. Contact us here, meet with these 2 board members, then these 2 board members. This didn't pass. And as you stated, there's nobody that disagrees that we don't have problems with our schools. Yep. You know, as far as their condition, nobody disagrees with that. The thing is what can we do to be able to afford it, to do something? And for some reason, this board, in my opinion, does not seem to want to have that conversation. They just want to knock them all down and try to rebuild some on only $238 million.
Well, and can I give 2 points to that?
Absolutely.
Because, you know, those are astute observations. I think one of the problems is that this board which is not unlike the board I was on and every board in between and before and after. Mm-hmm. Board members don't have the background to personally get in the weeds of these decisions. And so when you ask them, why aren't you doing A, B, or C? They legitimately don't know. And so I do think we have gotten to the point. We've let it go so long. And, you know, one of the things when we got our study, you know, I would look at what boards had been doing, you know, because one of the first questions I have is, why am I dealing with something that has been ignored for 30 years? Mm. And the worst, and the worst thing for a board member who has a limited term where they're in office, nobody wants to be the person that says, hey, we have to take X number of dollars, millions of dollars out of our operating budget to fix these things. Someone in the, I think, 80s, 90s, whenever it was, one board decided, okay, we're going to replace all of the windows in all of the buildings at the same time. That's a shiny thing. I don't want to degrade anything that I don't know which board did it. So if you're watching and you were on that board, I'm not trying to offend you, but that's most complex problems are not resolved by simplistic solutions. Right. You know, that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And, you know, having all of your windows or now all of your buildings on the same replacement schedule is tough. Mm-hmm. And it's a tough sell. And the other thing I want to talk about is that you mentioned having a committee. Right. You know, your other guest, Mr. Ames, touched on this a little bit. I don't have maybe the jaundiced view of it altogether that he has, and he's welcome to that view. But you have board committees and superintendent's committees. And school districts really love superintendent's committees that have 2 board members on them because they're not meetings of the board, and so they don't have to put them on. They're not open meetings. They're not subject to the Open Meetings Act. And there are times where you're allowed to speak more freely, and that's helpful. This, however, this issue is so large and so in front of the public that I'm of the opinion that we need it has to almost be a board committee. It can be a superintendent's committee, but all of its meetings need to be open to the public. They need to be live streamed. They need to be recorded, videoed. And then you get the people in the room that can offer you opinions. And you can't call, you know, the guy down the street who dabbles in plumbing to advise you on how to upgrade the plumbing in a school building. That's not going to work. Right. You know, but we do have, you know, really large contractors based in Stow. We have businesses in Stow who deal with large contractors who could get us to the right people, to kind of your point, to get them in and say, what can we do? And by the way, just because you're telling us what we can do doesn't mean you're going to get the bid. Well, that was kind of my point. It wasn't for anybody to give like the small plumber down the street, but the small plumber down the street may have done some work for the big contractor who can say, hey, did you ever talk to Joe Schmo who does his work? That's the whole idea is, and it's not their fault because they know who they know and they don't know who they don't know. Right. And it's depend on the community to point you in a direction that might help you and follow up on that. And we don't seem to have that. That was my point. It's really hard to get yourself to the point where, you know, the community is like, we don't want you to spend this kind of money, to then sell the community. Well, you know what? We have to spend $150,000 on various consultants to get us in the right direction. But I do think we're there. You know, one of the things I talked about today on my page with a couple of parents is that we had a much smaller scope issue when I was on the board with buses. And our prior assistant superintendent operations director, Rob Gress, did a masterful job of guiding the board through what the problem was, what we need to do to prepare to fix it, and then how do we commit to fix it. Right. And the board was unhappy at that point, you know, learning that you have a fleet of, you know, 60 buses, and you're 7 years behind replacement schedule on vehicles is bad. Right. You know, nobody wants that because, you know, vehicles aren't buildings. They don't last that long. And so, you know, you have bus mechanics, but the community relies upon all of those buses to be operational on our coldest and worst days. And what ends up happening is the worse the weather, the worse the old buses perform. And you end up spending thousands of dollars in man hours and parts trying to fix these things. So, you know, Rob kind of spearheaded getting the board to approve I think it was $50,000 or $60,000 study about all of the age of all of our equipment, what can we get by with for a while, and then coming up with a plan that says, all right, we might on a normal world want to order X number of buses every year. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to order 3X for the next 7 years to get ourselves on track again. And that's what we did. And so there were some board members that were very uncomfortable with the extra expenditures. To some extent, Mr. Grest also helped us with the high school roof. That roof project had been going on forever. And eventually the board and Rob said, enough is enough.
Right. Yeah.
And we that's we took out a loan against future PI money to just finish the roof.
Yeah.
So that with the time when the board wasn't finishing the last section of the roof, it was talking about finishing the first section of the roof again. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, that's there's a lot to it to consider. There's a lot of things that move forward. A lot of, as you said, there's just a lot of moving parts within the board. You're literally governing thousands of kids, and then dealing with thousands of people's tax money to be able to deal with it. And it's a big job, and I can understand people being flustered and frustrated and, wanting to push this forward and there be bickering between board members. But it seems to me right now that we're seeing something very different. I attended a lot of board meetings in the past, and it doesn't seem to have that vibe. It seems like there's just a complete breakdown of communication on the board, a complete breakdown of processes happening, in just weird intervals. It doesn't make sense. And I'm going to ask you, because of your past performance on the board, would that be another reason why you're doing this? Is just to restore order, I guess.
Well, I think the board could, the most likely to succeed boards reflect the population of their community as closely as possible to whatever degree that you can. And there will always be hardliners on either politically or on certain issues on the left or the right, union, non-union, whatever you want to say. There will be people that have a hardline view based upon their perspective. A board is more successful if it's got a kind of moderate voice in the middle. You don't all have to be moderate. Moderates frustrate a lot of people who are active in the community because they're active because they're not moderate. It's very hard to find really active moderate people. You don't find protesters who are moderation.
No, they're not like, let's do that, but maybe not that hard. Let's maybe look at this a little bit. Yeah, you don't see that.
Yeah, you don't find too many voices pushing the middle of the road because that's just, those people are generally more accommodating. I'm getting myself in trouble, but they're generally more accommodating of the other views because they're not as extreme because they're in the middle.
Right.
And I think that, when you look at boards, my board was not, we weren't in lockstep all the time. There were plenty of times where you could have just called the executive session. The board would like to go into executive session so two members could yell at Jason Whitacre. That was fairly common early in my term, and I didn't care. I'm my background, people yell at me all the time, so that didn't bother me. But the discussions we had were usually fruitful. We had discussions where one or two board members would kind of go off the beaten path, but at the end of the day, there were other board members kind of like, okay, let's get back to
to business.
Yeah, and right. It's tough watching the current meetings. There's clearly a group that's struggling to work together sometimes, and I don't want to. Again, I'm not here to criticize anyone on a personal level. I think the community, though. I've heard from a lot of people in the community that they're disappointed in the way that the board is conducting its meetings, the way that they interact with each other. And I don't know that anyone on the board is immune from that. I think that, when it always takes two to fight. And right. So, when it's happening, it's happening. But I think that the message that we're sending to the community and the kids and the observers,
the kids especially,
is, you'd like to have a board that's able to get along, without sounding condescending toward each other or, unnecessarily objecting to everything. They have to find a common way of going about it.
Yeah.
And whether it's, for whatever reason, when I was on the board, I would successfully, sometimes diffuse those issues. And I think having attorneys on the board, we have to fight for people, but you learn to do it in a respectful manner. So at the end of the day, you don't all have to go have a beer together. You don't all have to go, do things together socially, but you have to be able to get along and have enough trust in each other to be honest, and know that it's not going to bite you in the tail later.
Right. Well, I think that the honesty is the big thing. And I think that when you have, a process of a meeting, Robert's Rules of Orders, et cetera, when you have that breakdown, you lose the honesty of the conversation and the entire voice doesn't get out. And it's not just saying one person's right, one person's wrong. It's getting the whole picture, not only to the public, but to the board. This is the whole picture. Let's just, for instance, I'll make up some names, Margaret, Kathy, and John don't get along, and if Margaret and John are on the same side and they are, they want this to happen, they want that to happen, then Kathy, her voices, she might actually have an idea that they might agree with. And if you're constantly shutting Kathy down, then Margaret's, you're not getting the full picture. The school board, in my opinion, should be a one force thing. One force for the kids, for the taxpayer. Make sure everybody's getting the bang for the buck. Make sure the kids are getting an education and are happy. Stop setting bad examples, I think, is my kind of outlook on that. And I think you share that.
Well, and even in your example, Kathy bears a lot of responsibility too. It's hard to be in the minority of the board. Mm-hmm. It's hard to constantly lose 4-1, 3-2 fights. But you have to respect the will of the board. You have to respect the majority vote in the end. And that's all of them have to work together to be able to get through the debate so that when they get to the end, they say, look, I didn't have enough people who agreed with me. And I had that a lot when I was on the board. And there were things that they voted down that years later kind of came back. When I was on the board, I was really against pay to participate. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to be for it, against it, ambivalent about it, doesn't matter. I didn't like it. And I stated my reasons repeatedly. And the boards that I was on would not remove it. We watered it down a little bit. They stopped charging the service organizations, at least, for pay to play fees. Mm-hmm. like the Key Club serves the community. The Key Club does important things in the community. They go to the senior centers. They do all of these things. Stop charging kids to perform community service.
Right.
And so they stopped that, but it wasn't until, a year or two after I was on the board where the new board revisited the issue and eventually voted to remove the fees. Doesn't mean everyone agrees with it. It just, that was a position that I wanted, but I had to say what I needed to say, try to be persuasive, but then accept the results, knowing that at some point it might get revisited. And if I constantly am at my fellow board members about, how wrong I think they are, I can't just keep showing up to every meeting with a Festivus poll.
Right.
I can't challenge the superintendent to an arm wrestling contest to determine what's going to happen here. So you have to be respectful. And I think there are a lot of times professional respect is kind of seen as surrender by people who are observing. Like they probably felt, a lot of people when I was on the board felt like I would just surrender.
I did. And I'm honest about that. I did. Yeah.
But when you're one of five, the minority can't govern. Right. So, you do your best.
There comes a time where you just have to understand where your arguments are lost and move forward for the better, I think is what you're getting at. And I think that's something that I did watch you do. Again, it took, there was a view of you with a consensus. We didn't hate you. Okay. It wasn't a hate. And you do care. Stop saying I don't care. Of course you care. We didn't hate you. It was just, again, you have a hard line left and a hard line right, and everybody wants their certain political philosophy pushed through. But when you back up and look at it and understand the definition of what a school board is supposed to do, it's supposed to be apolitical. You're not supposed to have any type of political viewpoint pushing. You're going to, because that's just reality. Right. But I think keeping it to that middle as much as possible, especially like what you just said, when you ain't got a shot in hell, just, as long as the process was followed through and the vote was legal within that process, then that's the vote. That was the will of the school board. Do something about it later, I guess.
Well, and one of the things that I would find somewhat comical is that depending on the issue, one side or the other, they would start sending me nasty messages on Facebook or calling me names.
I never did that.
If I was, I was in favor of finding a way to provide breakfast and lunch to the students. If the kids that qualified for the free or reduced lunch, paying, having that paid for, and then finding ways to offer maybe in bulk or in, almost like a subscription base. Like, look, my kid's going to eat, they have access to breakfast every day for the whole semester. It's a meal plan essentially, and we'll pay less than the contract, less than the daily rate, but we're going to pay an amount that and I would say that. See, I just did it. I would say that because if you look at all of the various studies that have been done, more than any other method, we're talking tutoring, we're talking extra school,
right?
Making sure the kids aren't hungry, increase their performance and test scores dollar for dollar over and above any intervention that the school can do. The school district could offer tutoring to every single child, and maybe that works at the cost of a private tutor for every child. But dollar for dollar, if you just give the kids breakfast, make sure they've eaten breakfast, they do better. And, and that might not be an economic thing, to be honest with you. Sometimes it is. But sometimes, I've got a kid in high school at the house. That bus comes at 6:20 in the morning. It's a struggle to make sure he's on it, let alone on it and eating. And so for some kids, 6 o'clock in the morning is too early to eat. And that's not a problem with them. That's not a problem with my household. It's just that's early. That's really early. And especially for teenagers, 6 o'clock is a really tough time in the morning. And so giving them a chance to eat isn't, I got called Bernie Sanders. I got called all these other terms, and I would just kind of chuckle at it because then the next thing that would come up I would take a different position, and then I'd have people on the other side of the aisle calling me names too. So
Right. You can't win for losing.
but you have to let it bounce off you and just do what you think is right.
And that's exactly what it is, and you're not a flip flopper.
I don't think so.
I think I've seen you take stances on topics, and I don't think you've ever come around and said, well, okay, I guess, you do consider stuff. If somebody comes up to you and says, hey, this is what I'm thinking about it, even in public comments, you've been one to always consider, at least you've looked at me, and I've been in some tirades before. You've looked at me with consideration, and I think we've talked about stuff after that. I think there's just been so much, but yeah, I mean, I honestly, what you do as far as how you maintain your position on a board, I think is a good way to go. And it took me a while to come down to that. I don't want a bunch of political left wings. I don't even want a bunch of political right wings. And I'm very conservative on a school board. I really do want more people, especially after what I've witnessed after the last year and a half. I want more people, in my opinion, to be able to just handle a situation like an adult, I think is what I'm looking for. And it looks like you going and throwing your hat into the ring again. It kind of looks like that's sort of the way that you view it. Not that you're putting anybody down, or not that I'm saying that you're putting anybody down, but it seems that there has to be somebody to reset the rules, dump the pieces off the board game, reset the board game, and let's try this again. Is that accurate?
Well, and I think it is accurate, but I think everyone needs to feel like we're all playing the same board game under the same rules, and the rules aren't changing based upon who's speaking, what the issue is. I am consistent to a fault in that way, where again, I would get the people on the left, the people on the right, they would be upset with me about all of it. Sometimes.
Yeah, you're going to get it anyway. You're headed for that, right?
It was important to me that I said my piece. With public comment, I'm not going to claim that I'm some kind of saint, because if the school district cameras were a little better, you would see me sometimes rolling my eyes at what's being said to me. Right. But it was important to me that I wasn't burying my head in a laptop when people are talking.
And that means anybody on the board or public comments.
If I was looking down at a piece of paper, I might be referring to something. And there were times where people would say something in public comment, and I might hop on my laptop because I need to verify what they're saying so that I could respond to it. But I would try to not make a habit of, I wasn't up on a school board meeting checking emails on my laptop while people were talking.
Right.
No matter what they were saying. And, people said a lot of things in public comment when I was on the board that I didn't agree with. I had fellow board members say a lot of things that I didn't agree with, and they would kind of stray off topic a lot. And the goal is, especially when you're presiding over the meeting, at least that my goal was, help the meeting move along, find ways to get to the end of the day, mm-hmm. respect the process. One of the things, I think a story I can tell now is that, we had this issue. We had a teacher at the time. Her Facebook account had posted some really rough, racist language. It had appeared that the teacher may have friended this other person specifically just to say this stuff to them. And it came to light. I remember I was sitting in my office at work, and all of a sudden my school board email starts blowing up. Email after email. I'm like, all right, what is this? And I realized I start seeing these screenshots, and of course I'm the board president going, great. Now I've got to deal with this. Yeah. And so, I get the superintendent on the phone. We talk about it. The teacher in question said I was hacked. And I don't necessarily want to disbelieve someone, but I was like, look, fine, we won't, you're innocent until proven guilty, so to speak, but I'm not going to just agree with anything. We have to let this process play out.
Correct.
And so the teacher goes to her local police department, files a police report. I eventually end up on the phone with the officer who interviewed her, basically telling me to stand down. And I'm, like I felt like the computer in the sci-fi movie. I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Right. Yeah.
I can't do that. And so ultimately, a local news reporter made a public records request to the police department. And the effect of that was public records requests go outside the police department. They usually go to the prosecutor, the law director's office. And so they go to this city's law director's office and they go to the officer, I think, what did you do to investigate this? And it turns out that basically it was this one-on-one conversation and that was it. Well, after the public records request, I think the law director, again, I'm speculating here, but I think the law director told the police department, you're going to go at least subpoena Facebook. In the meantime, I had worked with another prior board member who is on the faculty at University of Akron. We had gotten their lab, their forensics lab, had agreed to review the teacher's devices for free to help exonerate her, because it's tough. You know, if you're falsely accused of something, proving a negative is tough.
It's very hard.
And so I said, look, if you didn't do this, let's take your device, you take it to the University of Akron, they'll look at it, and let's see what happens. And she wouldn't do that. And I already kind of had a thought when people start looking to me, when someone looks like they might be hiding something, I said, okay, well, that's not great. So that all happens. And mind you, at that time, there were a lot of people in the community and in the school district trying to pressure me as the board president to exonerate this teacher in public, because we had made the decision, and I put out a statement after it happened, like abhorring the language that was used. We don't use that language here. We're going to investigate, figure out how this happened and what happened and all that. Well, they felt like I was maybe condemning this teacher to public ridicule.
Even though you were just talking about the language.
Right. No one should say that. However, it got in anyway. So ultimately, I eventually get a call saying, well, the subpoena came back, and now we have a confession all of a sudden that the teacher, in fact, did do it. And it's like, okay. In the meantime, though, I have people coming at me. Why won't you discuss this in public? Submitting letters to be read, with public comment, getting angry with me because I'm eliminating the parts of I'm refusing to read the parts of the letters that address this situation because it was under investigation.
Right.
And basically, like, you're just trying to push this under the rug. You're letting racism run rampant in our schools. And no matter how many times I said, hey, this person is entitled to due process. We have to let this play out. And ultimately it does play out. And everything worked out the way it probably should have from a justice standpoint.
Because it did play out.
Right.
It played out.
Right. And so the teacher ended up resigning. And we were able to talk about at the board meeting why she resigned and what she had done and what we had found out. And then it was over. But, in the meantime, I have people, at that point they were political left. Again, I have plenty of people from the political right yelling at me all the time. But at that time, people on the political left yelling at me saying, I'm enabling racism. Right. And that was obviously not my intent. I'm an attorney. I understand due process. This teacher's entitled to it here. Let's let this play out. Well, in fact,
you can come under, major problems, because you would be violating her rights if you just, with no evidence, nothing, just fire her. Well, there could be repercussions from that.
Yeah, and I had a percentage of the community wanted her terminated immediately, probably put out in stocks in the front of the schools. And then I had another part of the community saying, you have to declare that she didn't do it so that she can continue her career.
But there was nobody saying, let's let the process work out.
Right. Well, and I think there were probably a lot of people that felt that way, but those are the people that don't come to the meetings, right? Because the process is playing out. And so the process does play out. She ends up admitting to it. And afterward, I think, again, the result was probably the correct result. Yeah. And there was no hiding of racism. There was no holding that back. My goal was to have people that need to be held accountable be held accountable. Right.
And I'm not going to go into any specifics about anything that's happened because that's not the point of our interview right now. But there are a couple circumstances over the last year and a half or so that I can think of where the process itself, doing exactly what you just did, just getting down to the bottom of it and letting the proper people take a look at it and find the information. If you let that process pay out, there would be people that are suffering right now in pretty bad ways, young kids that probably would have been exonerated, and not have the problems they're going through. And so again, process is huge, and I'm glad that you look at it that way. And I know that you did work, again, through the last couple of years of conversation with you. I do understand that now. Sometimes it takes a hard liner a little while to calm down.
It's all of it's fine. I think the goal here is to give everyone their due process. There is a time for accountability, but we oftentimes nowadays with social media and how fast things move on social media and how fast opinions get out there, and then there's groupthink and crowdthink, and that's all not always the best thing. Everyone wants to they want to show that they are holding people accountable, but sometimes they jump the gun a little bit, and sometimes they say that before all the facts are in because they don't want to be accused of pushing something under the rug,
whatever the other side is going to say.
And so you have to be, when you're in the position of authority at that point, you have to be willing to say to the community, the process is ongoing.
Right. And we're not lying about it.
Right.
It's ongoing.
And if you don't trust me, I'm sorry that you don't trust me, but eventually we'll get to the end of this and you can either say I did the right thing or I didn't.
Right.
And that's all I can do. And even in the case with the teacher and the comments and everything, there are probably people that feel like she shouldn't have had to answer for that. But she did. And I think at the end of the day that we got it right.
Yeah. There's rules of conduct for teachers. So I would, we had with the ex-band director, we had problems with that too. And I knew him for a very long, he was a student teacher when I was in Nordonia. And there was things that I think he should have been given a little bit more of a chance to explain, or maybe a little bit harder look. I don't know. I wasn't there. But at the end of the day, it did take a while to reach the decision that they came to. And that's the decision they came to. So what are you going to do? All right, let's just pretend we're going to go in the time machine here.
All right.
Jason Whitacre starts campaigning for school board, gets the seat.
All right.
What's Jason Whitacre's vision? What's he looking for when he sits down and starts to consider school business moving forward? What's your vision for the schools?
Ironically, I think you could look at the recent election and I can steal taglines from both of the major candidates and say, I want to make boring great again. And we're not going back.
Yeah.
Take both of them and say, look, we're not going back to this period of distrust and discord and lack of transparency. Everything's going to be open and upfront. We're going to have these open conversations, and we're going to respect each other in the process. And so, we're going to go about this in a way that is methodical, is boring, but is meant to acquire the right results through, again, being deliberative in what we're doing, especially on big issues. There are times where you need to act. I would say as a school board, there are less times that you have to act on a quick emergency basis than you might otherwise think. It's very rare. It does happen, whether it's a public health crisis or, the school shooting issue, or, we had the issue with the buses the one year where there was a question about the safety of the buses and making sure that all the kids are accounted for. Ironically, that situation with the buses was another example of how did we resolve the issue as a board? And people who don't remember that meeting, I don't think that meeting was live streamed because it was pre me winning that argument.
Right.
We had dozens of angry parents, and rightfully so, at our meeting. And the board at that time made the decision that we were going to hear every single one of them out. It didn't matter how long it took. And so we heard it out. And much to that superintendent's dismay, Dave Lacotte, Dr. Dave Lacotte, and I had come up with this thought that we were going to see if we can get consensus on the board to establish a board committee on dealing with the buses. And we were going to provide regular reports to the community. We were going to be open and transparent. We were going to involve local law enforcement, get their opinions. And we did all of those things. And I think ultimately the people that were opposed to having that process, I think eventually, and maybe I'm speaking because, they didn't want to upset me and they just, placating me at the time, but I think that there was an appreciation for, we did this the right way. We met, we didn't act harshly. We didn't act, in a way that was
unruly,
unfair. We didn't throw anyone under the bus.
Right.
Dealing so with buses. And we met, and eventually we ended up deciding on this new software that the school's using now. No software is perfect. Foreshadowing a couple of years, when the school district had to go to hybrid learning, where the kids were on different schedules, and it was a really tough thing. I think if you asked the people that were in the bus garage at the time, could they have managed that situation if the newer software hadn't already been implemented?
Right. Yeah.
And the answer was no.
Mm-hmm.
Because before our software updates, new purchases, a lot of the bus scheduling was done by hand. And so it was very difficult. Ironically, Ohio law is not helpful to anyone in this situation. So under Ohio law, you can disagree or not, the school bus drivers aren't, and this was at least when I was on board, I don't think anything's changed, they weren't allowed to have GPS going in their bus because they felt it was distracting. Whatever reason, the Ohio legislature does not allow the buses to have active GPS going.
Okay.
And so you have these bus drivers, sometimes substitute bus drivers, bunch of teenagers in the back doing everything that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times where I would be driving my car and I would see the bus at a stop sign, and I've got the bus driver with a pad of paper right
looking
next
at a
to
map,
the steering wheel,
right? Yeah.
Trying to figure out which kid to drop off.
Okay.
And that seemed, again, we can't control what they do down in Columbus, but to me, there's a really strong argument that we should be allowed to allow our bus drivers to have turn-by-turn directions, telling them when to stop. Because to me, that the kids are safer that way.
I think so too, for a lot of reasons.
And that's a debate that could be had. I'm sure there are other parts of that debate that you don't want somebody hacking into the GPS. You don't want, if anybody watched the show The Office, at one point, Michael and Dwight are driving and the GPS tells them to drive the car into a lake and he just drives it right into the lake. We don't want that happening with our bus drivers,
No,
but I don't think that's realistic. So. But it foreshadowed, we took care of a problem. We didn't try to push it under the rug. We didn't try to hide from it.
Right.
We just said, mistakes were made. We're going to fix it. And then we did. And we showed the community what we were doing as we were doing it. And I think the community appreciated it at that time.
Well, I think just the line "mistakes were made." We made a mistake. We made a mistake. And no matter who was at fault, we're all the district. We're the ones that are in control here, so it's all of our fault. Apologies. Let's move forward and correct it. And that's something that I think we've also been missing lately is just the ability to say we screwed up. Because believe it or not, there are people on every side of every argument when it comes to the district that are very willing to say, okay, you admitted the mistake. And as long as you say, we are extremely sorry, not sorry, and then move on
right.
to the next thing. But, you do have to say, I'm extremely sorry, because you are messing around with the lives of kids. A lot of these people have parents, are parents in the district, or they're flipping the bill. So you do kind of have to apologize for that.
But at least acknowledge that something didn't go the way you planned, that we need to do better and we will.
Yeah.
And I remember at that time, there was an administrator who I won't name, was attempting to, gaslight me, telling me the buses were fine and the buses were fixed. And, here I am furiously on my cell phone, like, well, I'm waiting for my kid's bus. I'm at the bus stop right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's an hour and a half after his drop off. Don't gaslight me. things aren't fixed. If they were, I'd be at home by now.
Right.
And so I think that was one of the other things. It was important to have parents on the board. You don't have to have the whole board full of parents.
No.
But, parents with kids in the school have something else at stake.
Again, more skin in the game.
It's not to say that a community whose kids are, member whose kids are retired can't serve on a school board, because they very much can.
Right.
But you don't want, that goes back to my other comment about having a school board or any board that's reflective of the community in some way, and having parents. It doesn't always have to be perfect, but having parents on the school board is better than not having them on the school board.
Which I agree. Yeah, because you're going to succeed or fail yourself as a parent. Well, not fail. That'd be wrong. But you're gonna suffer or not, depending on what's coming out of that board at that time. It's not something that might be in the future, or something that that's at that time. You're going to reap the benefits or the problems for that. I mean, I think we've covered quite a bit here. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
It's, I think just to kind of wrap this up a little bit, I think transparency, honesty, intellectual honesty, actual honesty, all of that respect builds into this trust from the community toward their school board members, trust from the school administrators that their board members are going to be open, honest, and consistent. And trust that from the board that everyone else can do their jobs and their community is going to hear them out. As a board member, I have to trust that if I say something to the community, they're at least willing to hear me out. And, that is built over time. It's not speaking anything profound to say that it's way easier to lose the trust than it is to gain it and keep it.
Yep.
And, I don't have to be liked. The decisions everyone doesn't have to agree with the decisions or the logic, but I feel like if the more that people hear my logic, even if they don't like it, they're going to say, you know what, we disagree. And maybe next time, the next election, we'll elect people that we do agree with. But my hope would be that they would at least require the other candidate to have the same level of process-driven methodology, so that everyone feels like they're going to be treated consistently. And, that goes from, even the PI money, the permanent improvement money. There were controversies over the way that money was being spent when I was on the board. And, one of my favorite analogies was the Jeff Goldblum Jurassic Park. You don't want to spend so much time thinking about what you can do. Instead, think about what you should do.
Right.
And so, I think that when you talk about public trust, they approved that permanent improvement levy. It was a big deal when it was approved. It was probably too little, too late in some respects, but it was needed regardless. And I think people believed that if I vote for this, that the board is going to spend this on physical, maintenance and improvement. And, technically under the PI rules, technically, as long as the asset that you're buying is lasting, I think, at least 5 years, you can call it a permanent improvement. So they can buy Chromebooks. A superintendent can choose to buy Chromebooks with the PI money, but that's not what the community thought you were going to do with their money.
Right.
It's like if you give money to a political candidate and then you find that political candidate gave your money to somebody else because he or she had too much, that doesn't mean you're real happy about that. He can or she can do it, but that doesn't mean that they should have.
Right.
And so I think, when you talk about this building the trust, it's being open and honest with everyone, and being intellectually honest that, even if this levy allows me to spend this money on Chromebooks, that's not what the community intended. They don't want to go into the school building and see, windows with condensation in between the panes, and, mold growing in a room,
and rivers flowing through basements.
Until you start, and if I could make one last kind of, move here, the field house. That's a big point of controversy. I approved the field house when I was on the board. I don't know what the scope changed after I got off the board. I think that the scope did change and expand a little bit, but the field house started with what was being reported back to the board as an unsafe athletic facility. Not enough room for the athletes, not enough equipment, not enough space. This isn't even, COVID made it worse, but our equipment's not out there. It's not safe. It's not up to speed. This isn't about us being innovative. We're not a Division I college. But we had this need, we had this deficiency, and the board said, okay, what are we going to do about it? And so one of the things that I have heard in the years on and on after that, and people are entitled to their opinion for sure, is that how can you justify spending X number of dollars, $5 million on a field house when you are now going to ask the community for $238 million for a bond? To me, it's like me telling my kids I'm not paying for a basketball hoop until my mortgage is paid off. Like, you don't get a basketball hoop in the front yard until I've paid off the mortgage on the house. Those kids are going to be up and graduated before I'm done paying that mortgage in most cases. And that's the same thing here. We have all these students that are there now. By the time the school district writes the facilities ship, how many generations of students are going to go through those schools and progress through all the schools, and you're going to deny them safe amenities? Again, not to say that they haven't maybe increased the scope in ways that I'm not quite privy to.
Right.
But I
think they have. I think that's the main argument of people, is that it's become something that it wasn't supposed to be. And, we just saw it at the last school board meeting, as a matter of fact, where there's, expenditures and plans that came into place while the field house was being built, not conceived of per se, but, there's expenditures where it looks like it's going to go to the taxpayer. And, there's some people on the payroll that shouldn't be there. And there's some people on the payroll or that aren't on the payroll yet, which they need and wasn't even considered. Yep. So, there's a lot of issues that go on with that. But like you said before, it's about an open and honest conversation, not just among the board members, but with the community. And that actually goes to the community too. Yeah. The community can't just come flying off the handle out of nowhere on a particular subject immediately. When they ask questions, when they bring up, certain issues, I believe it's up to the board to answer that.
Sure.
And and from what I've seen, being on the other side of what's happening on the school board right now, there's a lot of people that have asked those questions months ago and still have not gotten the answer. And that's the reason for this inflation. But,
well, and there are people that will maintain today that the Fieldhouse project was conceived, approved, and begun in the dark of night and in the back room. And if you go back and watch, because these meetings are all from this era are very much still there.
Yeah.
The board entertained presentation after presentation over a period of weeks, if not months, before approving the Fieldhouse plans. And so, I don't know what you expect a board to do. If we say, look, all of our meetings are online, all of our agendas are online, and this agenda item is there meeting after meeting after meeting, and there's PowerPoint presentations. And I will say, we're in 2024. I really would like to see people move on from PowerPoint presentations because they're more boring than me. I would like to see something a little more dynamic than that. And I think the community would like that. But at the end of the day, though, there was extended discussion. There was debate amongst the board. Should we do this? Shouldn't we do this? Why might we do this? Why would we not do this? And it ultimately was approved and voted on at a regular meeting after being discussed at like 6 or 8 regular meetings. And so, the criticism about the decision is entirely fair. Casting it as something done in the shadows maybe doesn't match up with history. And it does make it harder to say that things that are happening now maybe aren't being done in the light, open light of day. When you kind of lose the intellectual honesty of the argument sometimes by trying to recast other things into that mold that don't matter. And so I try, I'm human. I try not to do that. And I think that that's one of the reasons that people with my personality are helpful on these boards. Is because I at least give it my best effort to not do that. Right. And not, rewrite history when it suits me.
Right. Well, you stick to the information at hand, the facts as it was and as it is, and that's I think that's rather important. I'm one of the reasons for this radio show is moving forward. I think like all the problems that you just mentioned as far as field house goes. A lot of people go to a board meeting, they only go to 2 a year, maybe. They're not very familiar with what goes on there, how it works, how an agenda, the way that it's presented. They don't get that. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to put together this show, was to help try and explain that. And eventually I'm going to start having, after meetings and stuff like that, certain board members on and say, hey, can you explain what just happened? You know what I mean? So people we don't wind up in that, like what you just talked about with the field house. And it was actually something from its beginning that was developed, talked about in open meeting, and discussed. And so I hope that, moving forward, once we get past all the fun that we're having right now on the school board, eventually I would like to get to a point where we can start having that open and honest conversation outside of the board meeting to explain what was actually said, what was actually going for. So, Jason, I appreciate you coming in.
Sure.
Moving forward here, I'm glad to see that you're going to make another run at it. Is this a for sure thing, or you're 80%? What are you?
I wholeheartedly intend to run.
Okay.
And so absent some kind of significant unforeseen event, maybe the board gets the collective head out of the tail. I don't know what that event might be.
Yeah, so you're running for sure.
Yeah, but I think that it's important that the slate of candidates be filled with people that are, mindful of process over results in the interim. I get that that's not going to appeal to hardliners on either side. I'm not that person. I'm not trying to be that person. I'm happy to answer questions. I think I've always been happy to answer questions. I don't delete comments from my candidate Facebook page on Facebook. I try to maybe redirect sometimes to make sure that everyone's staying on topic, because if you start talking about, there's big issues you can just bring up every single time, and then it kind of moots out what you're talking about. But, I'm more of an open and honest type of a person. I don't play hide the ball. If I can't justify my argument, I need to reconsider my argument. And so that's the kind of approach that I have. And so I try to be approachable. I'm happy to discuss things with you here. I'm happy to discuss things with other people. If the Joe Schmo wants to have a podcast, I'll talk to him as long as they're going to be fair. And you're very fair. And I don't think that, there are times where you could tell that, okay, you're going to edit my comments to make me sound like I was on something today.
I have a lot of editing to do for this show.
If you can just try to make me not so boring, that would be helpful.
I think you've done a tremendous job. Yeah, you're not a boring guy. You're an attorney, which, kind of makes you filthy. But I'm kidding about that, Jason. No, I don't think you're a boring guy at all. Right now, what we've been going through in this community being so divided, as a matter of fact, I think that even keel, what you call boring, is actually a breath of fresh air and kind of exciting for people to say, okay, you know what, let's get back to something that makes sense. And I think that's where you're at. Should people watch this, be interested more, have more questions for you? I know you have a Facebook page. Is there any other way to get a hold of you? And can you tell us what the Facebook page is?
Yeah, so the Facebook page is just my name. It's Jason Whitacre. If you don't know this, when you're naming Facebook pages, candidate pages, once you reach a certain threshold of people that follow you, you can't change your name. So it's just my name. Okay. I think for now, that's probably the best, easiest way. I like to answer questions in a way that help other people see what my answers might be. That doesn't mean I won't respond to messages or emails, but I prefer, especially at this stage, to say, look, if you've got a question, chances are there are 5 other people that have a question.
Right.
And I want to make sure that it's very easy for me to say something to you specific to the question that you've asked.
Yeah.
And if someone else has a different context, maybe the answer has a little bit of a different twist to it based on the context. That means I've changed answers for you versus someone else. But I like to have that record out there for people to see. And so the more they see of what I have to say, the more they can make a decision that I think will be informed. And so, at this point, I think the school district could use some help, moderating itself to the community a little bit,
Right.
Getting a little more, a little less acrimonious between the members, especially on meetings. And I think it's very difficult to do the best job you can when the board's kind of fighting amongst itself. And again, there's 5 people on that board. There's probably 5 different perspectives and maybe 5 different degrees of responsibility for how the board is acting at any given moment. But, the hope is that, the community needs to be engaged because, like I said, right now we have a bond issue that failed, whatever, 40 to 59 or whatever the percentages work out to. And that's unhealthy. It doesn't send a good message to our kids, our teachers, our building administrators. They don't want to see something that they desperately need, which is a plan. They don't want to see the fruits of that plan fail by 19 or 20%.
Well, I think it goes even beyond that, just more than the bond, issue. I think it comes with upcoming levies, whether they're renewals or not. That's what I see that this board has done is kind of it pushes a distrust from the community. And, there's a good possibility that if this behavior keeps up, they may not see an approval for anything in the next year or two. And that's unhealthy for a school district as well, especially when you have renewals that are taking care of certain, very important things. And I another reason to have that open and honest conversation, bring the community in and get that trust again. There's just way too much distrust.
Well, and to make no bones about it, if one of these renewals does not pass, the effects on the students in the short term would be devastating. I don't want to make any bones about that. And I think there are people that say, I'll never vote for another school levy. And I get that perspective. I just want to say, as someone who's dealt with the budgets, looked at the budgets, they're razor thin. And take away 15% of the school's income, whatever that amount is on that renewal, and it's disastrous for the student experience.
Right.
It's really bad. And so I think that people need to understand that. And one of the things that and it's not this board directly or any board directly, but anytime the school district is generating such angst, and the back and forth that we had leading up to the bond issue was really unhealthy for the community. The back and forth that we had during the superintendent search, unhealthy for the community, unhealthy to our incoming superintendent, who deserved a better open start than the acrimony that was here, unhelpful to the candidate that wasn't chosen. These people, this is a career, and they're working very hard on maintaining a career. And, it's on the board to do what they can to do the right thing, but also not cause this kind of acrimony. And I think that, they're doing everyone, including themselves, a disservice when the community is so mad. And instead of pointing the finger at elements of the community, because you can say when there's 5% of the community that's upset and they're really loud and vocal, it's just them.
Right.
But these last couple of issues have been rough. They've been rough on the community, and they've been unfair to the people that are actually doing the work in the buildings. Really unfair. The new superintendent, I've not met her. No one, I think, was opposing her personally. No one knew who
nobody
she was.
That I know. It wasn't a personal thing. Yeah, no.
Yeah. So, you have this situation where, you have a professional coming into work here and probably feeling like, what did I get myself into at times? But, it's hard when, and I was on the board when we had however many treasurers before me. It's really hard to get that next one. It's like, hiring the next coach of the Browns or the Raiders at this point. You've had the last 5, you look at their experience. Who wants to sign up for that? Maybe you get a good one, maybe you don't, but you make it harder on yourself.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, no one is served by that. And the ones who are hurt by that, the kids and the teachers, and they've got to have good morale going into school every day. not wondering, is the district literally crumbling around me?
Right. And they can feel that. They can see that. The kids, I mean, even when I was in school, and I made it very known, I couldn't stand school. I was very, very bad at it. I didn't want to be there. And that was my personality, in there. But I knew what was going on in the district. My parents weren't walking around and screaming about it, but you could get a pretty good feel for what was going on, just because of the changes. And it's just, again, leading back to just running things properly. It's important to have order. It's important to have, an outlet for every single board member to be able to speak their piece. And it's important for the public to be able to be a part of that conversation. And I believe that is one of your main goals. And I think that's very important for our district right now. I would say vital.
And it's hard, if you're a teacher or a student in this district, you're not immune. When you're in the school bus and you're driving down the street and you see signs for and against this bond issue, and you know what that means. Yeah. You see signs, when we have a renewal levy come up, and if it looks like it might be close, the school district is going to start talking about the services that it can't provide if the levy is denied. And, you have to do what you have to do as adults, but it sucks for the kids to be riding that school bus. And like, if this doesn't pass, I don't have this school bus to ride into, depending on where I live. If this doesn't pass, I might not get to go to band next year. And the band in Stow is a huge deal. Right. And athletics are a big deal. All the extracurriculars are part of the necessary student experience. And, it's hard for a kid, when you're 10, 12 years old and you don't understand the adult stuff, to see yes on 31, no on 31, yes on this superintendent, no on this superintendent. Like, we have to get to a point where our community feels like it can communicate these issues without public posturing like that. I get why everyone did it. I'm not criticizing anyone who did it. All I'm saying is you've got this collateral damage. Teachers going into work, passing all these signs, kids going to school, passing all the signs, parents arguing about it on Facebook. That's a bad environment.
It's not a good environment, but that, again, at least that honest conversation, because there's a lot on the other side, like talking about taking away busing and taking away this, that, and everything. And I think, and I know people that have found numbers and through records requests that say that shouldn't even been a possibility. And, so there's a lot on the other side that are going to say, well, that's a threat that is just being a threat, just to be able to position that way. Yep. But again, that's a conversation for another day. If you're good to go, Jason Whitacre, he said, find him on Facebook. That's WHITACRE. You can find him on Facebook, and I'm sure that if they want to have a more personal conversation with you, they can just ask you, hey, can I get your phone number, or can I get this, whatever. And I'm sure you'll have that conversation too. Thank you, sir, for coming on here. I think everybody's got a pretty good idea as to who you are. And when we get these things rolling, maybe we'll have you back on again.
Sounds good.
All right, Jason. Thank you very much.
All right.
We'll catch up to you. In the meantime, we'll see you on the other side of the break. I really hope you enjoyed that interview with Jason Whitacre. A lot of information that he put out there for all of us to digest. And as he self-describes himself as boring, I would say that there's a lot of fresh air that comes out of that interview. And the reason why is because, as I mentioned, we have known each other and gotten to know each other over the last couple of years, especially over the last couple of months. We've had a lot of discussions, and I can tell you that the Jason Whitacre that you saw in that interview is the real guy. That's not the stiff attorney in a suit talking to you, in some kind of legalese way. That is genuinely who that guy is. He got into a lot of topics of when he was on the board. And I just want to bring out one of the issues that he brought up in order to give you an idea of really how this guy thinks. when he brought up the busing issues and us being behind on being able to maintain the district with newer buses and stuff. What he was looking at was very real numbers and very real ways that school districts deal with their busing. He wasn't looking to overspend the district. As a matter of fact, being an attorney and as boring of a guy as he is, he's really looking to save the district money. And he will tackle issues such as busing. He would tackle the issues of buildings and stuff like that in the same way. It's really looking at what we need, not what we want, but what we need, what's behind, what really needs that attention paid to it. And that is the real Jason Whitacre. But I mean, there's a lot of ways that, when he was on board before, that he would handle his position in a very fair and, again, like I mentioned in the beginning, a very steady hand. He is a man of process. He wants everybody on that board and really everybody in the community to have a say. He doesn't just make up his mind on something if you can talk to him and persuade him in a different direction. He might say he can't be persuaded, but perhaps that there's, if there's an issue that somebody brings up in a different way, he is legitimately listening to you when you talk to him. And he might just change his mind on something if you have those points available. He doesn't talk to you as somebody who already has his mind made up. But he is a guy who is, he understands exactly what's going on at the time. But he will admit when he might be wrong about something or fall short of understanding the complete picture. This is not me pushing for Jason Whitacre, but I am telling you who the man is. So if you're looking for somebody, if you think it's important right now, especially looking at this board of education we have currently over the last couple of years, if you think it's important for somebody to be able to go in and have that steady hand, be able to have meetings run appropriately so that everybody can get their voice out, if you think that's important, maybe look at Jason. If you are conservative and you want things to be rammed down the throat of the people in a conservative way, he's probably not your guy. If you're liberal and you want to continue the policies that we've seen over the last couple of years, he's not your guy. But I can tell you that in my opinion, now I'm going to give you my opinion. In my opinion, you have to start with being able to have proper discourse. And I don't mean nice all the time. I mean meetings that are run properly and behind the scenes having these processes work out the way they're supposed to. Because in the end, it is going to lead, I think, in the positive for the district. And that, to me, from what I heard Jason say over this interview and conversations we've had before, that is what Jason Whitacre stands for. If you have any other questions for him, as he stated in the interview, the best way to get a hold of him right now is on his Facebook page. It's just Jason Whitacre, JASON WHITACRE. Look for Jason, get a hold of him. And I have no doubt he's going to answer your questions, sometimes long-winded. So you might have to say, Jason, speak English, and then he'll change it. He won't take offense. I was very pleased with what he had to say during the interview. And again, I'm going to emphasize that the guy that you saw in that interview is the real Jason Whitacre. So again, make your own minds up of who you think he is. In the future, we are going to have other candidates that are interested in school board for next year. And it's important that you listen to all of them. All of them. It doesn't matter what political side they're on. Obviously, as we all know, school board is not supposed to be go in any political direction. It's supposed to be very non-political. But if you're going to live in the real world, you have to understand that you're going to have people with conservative views, with liberal views. And now the question is, what does this district need moving forward because of the history that we've seen over the last few years? Other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you on the next show. Have a good one, kids.